I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't slam a single door. I just stood in the hallway outside the kitchen, still holding my cardigan closed with both hands because the house was cold that night, and I listened to my daughter-in-law tell my son that I needed to be gone before the end of the month. That was the moment everything changed. Not because of what she said, though God knows those words were ugly enough. It was because of what my son said next. Nothing. He said absolutely nothing. My name is Lillian. I'm 68 years old. I spent 31 years working as a hospital administrator in Columbus, Ohio. I raised my son, Brandon, largely on my own after his father left, when Brandon was 11. I worked double shifts, I skipped vacations, I sold my mother's jewelry when the furnace broke one January and I couldn't make rent and the repair bill at the same time. I did all of it, so that boy could have a stable life, a good life. And on a Tuesday evening in February, I stood in a drafty hallway in his house in Cincinnati and listened to his wife, Courtney, tell him that I was a problem that needed to be solved. And my son, my Brandon, loaded the dishwasher and said nothing at all. I want to tell this story the way it actually happened. Not the clean version, not the version where I had some wise response ready, where I walked in there and said something dignified. The truth is messier than that. The truth is that I pressed my back against that wall and I couldn't breathe right for a good 30 seconds. Let me back up. 8 months before that night I was diagnosed with early-stage Parkinson's disease. My neurologist, Dr. Felton, is a calm and careful man. He explained everything slowly. He told me that early stage meant I had time, that the progression was different for everyone, that many people lived full and independent lives for years, sometimes decades. He talked about medications, about lifestyle adjustments, about monitoring. He was kind about it, professional. I drove home from that appointment alone and sat in my car in the parking garage for 40 minutes. I had already been living with Brandon and Courtney for about a year at that point. It wasn't the original plan. It never is it? I had my own apartment in Columbus, a nice 2-bedroom on the 3rd floor of a building I'd lived in for 9 years. But I'd had a bad fall the previous winter, nothing broken, just a bad sprain, and Brandon had called me every day for 2 weeks afterward, asking me to think about next steps. He was worried, or I thought he was worried. He invited me to come stay with them, just temporarily, while I figured things out. And I said yes, because I love my son, and because, if I'm honest, the apartment had started to feel very quiet. So I moved into their guest room that had a bathroom I shared with their 2 kids, my grandchildren, Aidan, who was 9, and Sophia, who was 6. I loved being near those kids. I loved hearing Sophia's feet on the floor in the morning, loved helping Aidan with his reading. That part was good. That part was genuinely good. Courtney was polite. That's the word I want to use. Polite. Not warm. Polite. She kept the house a certain way and she liked things a certain way, and I understood that. It was her home, and I tried to stay out of the way. I cooked dinner twice a week because I wanted to contribute. I offered to do school pickup when her schedule was tight. I tried. But there was always something. A look when I left a dish in the wrong place. A comment delivered with a smile about how maybe I shouldn't let Aidan watch a second movie on weekends. A certain way she had of entering a room where I was sitting with the kids that made me feel like I was being monitored. I told myself I was being sensitive. Old women get sensitive. I was living in someone else's house. Of course there will be adjustments. And then I got the diagnosis. I told Brandon first. We sat at the kitchen table on a Saturday morning and I told him everything, Dr. Keller. Felton had explained, and Brandon went very still in the way he's done since he was a child when something scared him. He asked good questions. He hugged me. He said we'd figure it out together. I asked him to let me tell Courtney myself in my own time, and he agreed. I waited 2 weeks. I chose a Sunday afternoon when the kids were at a birthday party and the house was quiet. I sat Courtney down and I told her as clearly as I could. Early stage, manageable, no need to panic. I told her I was on medication, that my symptoms were mild, that Dr. Felton was optimistic. I told her I understood if this changed things, and that I didn't want to be a burden. She nodded. She said, "Thank you for telling me." She asked a few questions, and then she said she needed to think. I thought that was a reasonable response. I gave her space. I didn't push. What I didn't know was what happened 3 days later. I found out the way you find out most things you weren't supposed to know, by accident, on a Tuesday, because I'd come in from the backyard through the side door to get my reading glasses and the house was quiet, in that particular way where you don't think anyone is home. Courtney was on the phone in the kitchen. I heard my name. I stopped. "I don't know how to explain it," she was saying. "It's just, I didn't sign up for this. I didn't marry into a situation where I'm running a memory care facility out of my own house. The kids are going to watch her get worse. That's not fair to them." A pause. "I told Brandon last night. I said she needs to find somewhere else to go. Assisted living, a senior community, I don't care. There are resources. We can help her look. But she can't keep living here." Another pause. He didn't fight me on it. He knows I'm right. I walked back out the side door as quietly as I came in. I sat on the back porch steps in February cold without my coat, and I thought about what I had just heard. Parkinson's, not dementia, not a terminal diagnosis. Early-stage Parkinson's, carefully managed, barely symptomatic. Courtney had researched exactly enough to be frightened by the word, and not enough to understand what it actually meant. And she had already told Brandon, and Brandon had not fought her on it. That night was when I stood in the hallway and heard the second conversation, the one where Courtney said, her voice a little harder now, a little more certain, "I need her gone by the end of the month, Brandon. I love you, but this is my house too." And my son loaded the dishwasher. I went to my room. I sat on the edge of the bed. I looked at the wall. And then something shifted in me. Something very quiet and very cold and very clear. I opened my laptop. Here is what most people don't know about me. I spent 31 years managing hospital systems. I understand contracts. I understand financial structures. I understand how institutions work. I am not a woman who is easily confused by paperwork. And I had, over the course of my career, made careful decisions. The house I sold in Columbus when I moved to the apartment. I had not spent that money. I had invested it. Not extravagantly. Carefully. Index funds. A small rental property in Columbus I still owned. A savings account that I had been contributing to for 20 years. I had a financial advisor, a woman named Carol who I'd been working with for 15 years, and I trusted her completely. The number in my accounts when I logged in that night was not a small number. I sat with that number for a long time. Then I called Carol. I didn't tell her everything. I told her I was making some decisions, and I needed to move quickly on a few things, and Carol, who knows me, said, "Tell me what you need." The first thing I needed was to understand my options. The second thing I needed was to make sure that what I was about to do was done correctly, legally, and without any emotional errors. The next morning I called my attorney. His name is Gerald, and I've known him for 20 years, and when I explained the situation, he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "When can you come in?" I told Brandon I had a doctor's appointment, which was not entirely untrue. I did have a follow-up with Dr. Felton that week. At Gerald's office, I updated my will. I established a trust, a revocable living trust that I'd talked about doing for years and never gotten around to. I named my 2 grandchildren, Aidan and Sophia, as the primary beneficiaries. I named my sister Darlene, who lives in Raleigh and is one of the most sensible people I know, as my trustee. I made sure Brandon was not listed. Then I called a real estate agent. My rental property in Columbus had appreciated significantly. I had a tenant whose lease was ending in April. The agent, a bright young woman named Pryor, told me I could list it and expect a solid return. I told her to start the process. Then, and this is the part that took the most courage, I started looking at apartments, not assisted living, not memory care, apartments, real ones with full kitchens and natural light and room for a bookshelf. I found a 55-plus community in a suburb of Columbus, about 20 minutes from Darlene, that had a 2-bedroom unit opening in March. I scheduled a tour for the following weekend. I told Brandon I was visiting a friend. I toured the apartment on a cold Saturday morning, and I stood in the living room with its east-facing windows and the light coming in over the parking lot, and I thought, I could live here. I could be happy here. I put down a deposit that afternoon. I came home and made dinner. Courtney was pleasant at the table. Brandon asked about my weekend. I said it was good. Sophia climbed into my lap after dinner and asked me to read her a story, and I read her too. I did not tell them anything. The following week, I began packing slowly. A box here, a box there. Books in one box, winter clothes I didn't need. I told Brandon I was clearing out some things. He nodded and went back to his phone. 2 weeks later, on a Thursday morning, I put the last of my things in my car. I had a mover coming that afternoon for the furniture I brought from Columbus. Just a few pieces, a dresser, an armchair, things I'd had for years. I had arranged for a neighbour's son to help, and for the movers to come between 1 and 3 while Brandon was at work, and Courtney was doing her Thursday routine. I left a letter on the kitchen counter. I want to tell you exactly what I wrote, because I thought about it for a long time. I wrote, Brandon, I love you. I always will. I'm moving to a place where I can build my own life. I didn't want to leave under difficult circumstances, so I chose to leave quietly. I've updated my affairs and everything is in order. Please hug Aiden and Sophia for me. I'll call when I'm settled. Mum, nothing about what I'd heard. Nothing about the dishwasher. Nothing about the end of the month. I drove out of their neighborhood at 11:45 in the morning. I did not look in the rearview mirror. I want to tell you what the first night in my own place felt like, because I think people imagine it was sad. It wasn't. It was something I don't have a perfect word for. Spacious. That's close. My furniture was all in the wrong places because the movers had just set it down wherever. I had no food in the refrigerator except a gas station sandwich I'd bought on the drive. I sat on my armchair in the half-dark and ate that sandwich and listened to the buildings settle around me. I slept better than I had in months. Darlene came up that weekend. She brought groceries and her toolbox, and she hung my curtains and put together my kitchen shelf, and we sat at my new table and drank coffee, and she said, "You should have done this sooner." I think she was right. I got a call from Brandon 4 days after I left. I let it go to voicemail. He said he'd found my letter. He said he was worried. He said he thought we should talk. He sounded, honestly, more confused than anything. I don't think he'd understood what was happening while it was happening, and now it had already happened. I called him back the next day. I was calm. I told him I was settled, that I was well, that the new place was lovely. He asked why I hadn't said anything. I said I hadn't wanted to make things difficult for anyone. He started to say something about how Courtney and he had been thinking maybe I should look at some options, that they'd been meaning to bring it up. And I said gently, "Brandon, I know." There was a long pause. "I heard the conversations," I said, "both of them." He didn't say anything for a moment. "And then, Mum, I'm sorry." I told him I appreciated that. I told him I wanted to maintain a relationship with him and with the children. I told him that I was his mother, and that wasn't going to change. But I also told him that I had taken care of some things, legal and financial things, and that he should know those changes had been made. He asked what I meant. I told him I'd updated my will and established a trust, and that I'd worked with my attorney and financial advisor to make sure everything was properly arranged. I did not tell him the details. I didn't need to. The pause that followed told me he understood enough. "Everything goes to the grandchildren?" he asked quietly. I said I've made sure the people who matter most to me are taken care of. That includes Aidan and Sophia. It also includes my sister. He didn't ask more questions. I don't think he wanted to know more right then. Here is what happened over the next several months. My rental property sold in April for considerably more than I'd originally expected. The Columbus market had done well. I paid off the small remaining balance on a car loan, set aside a healthy emergency fund with Carol's guidance, and put the rest into a mix of stable investments that Carol and I had been talking about for some time. I also, and this is the part I'm most proud of, wrote a check to the nursing scholarship fund at the hospital system where I used to work. I'd always wanted to do that. I finally did. I joined a book club at the community centre. I started walking every morning, which my doctor encouraged, which helped my symptoms in ways that surprised me. I got to know my neighbours, a retired teacher 2 doors down, a woman named Gloria. No, wait, I was going to say, a woman my age who'd moved there after her husband passed, and we started having coffee on Thursday mornings. I went to visit Darlene in Raleigh for a long weekend in June. I drove myself. The Parkinson's was well managed. I felt good. Brandon called more often, slowly at first, then more regularly. He asked how I was. He told me things about the kids. I kept the conversations warm, but I kept them on my own terms. And then in July, Courtney called. I almost didn't pick up. I'm glad I did. She didn't start with small talk. She said, "Lillian, can I be honest with you?" I said she could. She told me that Brandon had been struggling at work, that there had been some restructuring at his company, and his position was being evaluated, which I understood to mean threatened. She told me they had some credit card debt they hadn't told anyone about, debt that had accumulated over a couple of years. She said they were worried about the mortgage. I listened without saying anything, and then she said what she'd called to say. She asked if I would consider lending them money. I want to tell you that I felt something righteous and satisfying in that moment. I'll be honest, I did, a little, but mostly what I felt was tired. A specific kind of tired that comes from loving someone who has hurt you and knowing that love isn't going anywhere, no matter how much you might wish it would cooperate. I told her I needed a few days to think. I called Gerald and Carol, and I thought about it carefully, not emotionally, carefully. This is what I decided. I would not give them money. Giving money freely under the circumstances seemed unwise for everyone, for them, because it wouldn't address the underlying patterns, and for me, because it wasn't something I was willing to do. But I would do something. I called Courtney back, and I told her I wasn't in a position to lend them money, but that I was willing to pay for 6 sessions with a financial counsellor, a service I'd found through my own advisor that worked with couples on debt management and budgeting. I also told her, and I chose my words carefully, that I had a relationship with the grandchildren that I intended to nurture, and that I hoped we could find a way to make sure Aidan and Sophia had their grandmother in their lives. Courtney was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I owe you an apology." I said, "I know." She said it anyway. She said she had been scared after I told her about the diagnosis. She said she'd jumped to a terrible place and said things and let things happen that she wasn't proud of. She didn't make excuses. She was, for the first time since I'd known her, entirely direct with me. I appreciated it. I didn't erase it, but I appreciated it. Brandon and Courtney went to the financial counselor. Brandon called me after the second session and talked for 20 minutes about things he'd been carrying for years: money anxiety, pressure, the sense that he was never doing enough. I think it was the most honest conversation we'd had in a long time. He also asked if he could bring the kids to visit my apartment. They came on a Sunday in August. Sophia ran from room to room calling it Grandma's house, and wanted to know if she could have a drawer for her things for when she slept over. Aidan found my bookshelf and wanted to know if I had any books about space. I did. I have 3. We sat at my kitchen table and ate the lunch I'd made, and my son looked around my apartment. At the curtains Darlene had hung, at the plants I'd been keeping alive on the windowsill, at the cardigan on the back of my chair. And he said, "You look good, Mom. You actually look good." I told him I felt good, and I meant it. I want to say something to any woman listening to this who is in the middle of a situation like mine, because I know you're out there. I know some of you are in the guest room right now. Some of you heard a conversation you weren't supposed to hear. Some of you have been politely, carefully, lovingly pushed to the margins of a life you built. Here is what I want you to know. Your age is not your weakness. Your illness is not your weakness. Your love for your family is not your weakness. These things are real and they matter and they do not make you small. What I did was not revenge. I've thought about that word and it's not quite right. What I did was recognize that the life I was living was not a life I had chosen, and I chose differently. I took care of myself the way I had taken care of everyone else for 30 years. I made decisions from a clear head and a quiet room, and I did not wait for anyone's permission. The diagnosis is still real. I go to Dr. Felton every 4 months. I take my medication. Some mornings my hands are steadier than others. I walk every day and I eat well, and I sleep in my own bed in my own home, and I wake up most mornings feeling like myself. I think that's the thing I'd lost and found again. Myself. If I had stayed in that hallway, if I had waited for Brandon to fight for me, if I had let Courtney's fear become my ceiling, I think I would have gotten smaller. I think I would have apologized for taking up space in a house that didn't want me. Instead, I left a note on a kitchen counter and drove myself home. And that was the sweetest thing I've done in years. I've been thinking a lot lately about the difference between leaving and running away. When I walked out of Brandon's house that Thursday morning with my car packed and a letter on the kitchen counter, some part of me worried it was the second thing. That I was fleeing because I was afraid, that I was too hurt to stay and work through it. I turned that question over for a long time before I made peace with the answer. I wasn't running, I was choosing, and there's a world of difference between those two things. What Courtney did, hearing the word Parkinson's and deciding almost immediately that I was a burden to be managed rather than a person to be loved, that came from fear. I understand that now. Fear makes people small. It makes them say things they can't take back and agree to things they don't fully mean. Brandon's silence that night in the kitchen wasn't cruelty. It was a man who had never learned how to hold 2 hard things at once. His wife's fear and his mother's dignity, and so he held neither. That's not an excuse, but it is an explanation. And I found that understanding why people fail you hurts less than simply cataloguing the failure. Here's what I've come to believe. Having lived 68 years and a fair amount of heartbreak, the way we treat people when they are most vulnerable is the truest measure of who we are. Not our intentions, not what we tell ourselves we would do. What we actually do when someone we love needs us and it costs us something to show up. Courtney failed that test. Brandon came close to failing it too, and I had to decide whether I was going to shrink myself down to fit inside their failure or build something larger somewhere else. I build something larger, the intelligence of it, and I think of it as intelligence, not just courage, was in the planning. I didn't react. I didn't confront. I didn't send emails I would regret. I sat with the information I had. I called the people I trusted, and I made deliberate decisions from a place of clarity rather than pain. That discipline, the ability to feel the wound and still think straight, is something I worked on for decades without ever knowing I was working on it. Every hard year as a single mother, every budget I stretched, every problem I solved alone, all of it was practice for that moment. And the moral weight of what I chose matters to me. I didn't try to hurt them. I didn't empty accounts or make accusations or wage any kind of campaign. I updated my own affairs. I protected my grandchildren's future, and I left a kind note. The outcomes, Courtney's phone call, the financial counseling, Brandon's honesty, those weren't things I engineered. They were the natural result of people living with the consequences of their own choices. That's not punishment. That's just how life works when nobody steps in to cushion the fall. What I want anyone in a similar situation to take from this is simple. Your resilience is not just about surviving hard things. It's about refusing to let hard things define the ceiling of your life. I could have stayed in that house and gotten smaller every month. I chose instead to find out what I was still capable of. A new apartment, a book club, Thursday coffee with a neighbour, a scholarship fund I'd always meant to start. None of that was available to me while I was trying to make myself invisible enough to be tolerated. You are not a burden. You are a person. And the moment you stop asking for permission to take up space is the moment your actual life begins again. I know that because mine did, and I am most mornings genuinely glad.